Hi, this is the Tempter podcast where we explore ways to consistently deliver differentiated products and services. Today, your hosts are Cliff and Kim. Hi, Kim. How are you doing?
Hi, Cliff. I'm doing fine. How about
Great.
you?
Good, real good. So today we're going to talk about a fork in the road. These forks are sometimes not. We don't even realize they exist, and we sometimes go down a path and we don't even realize we've taken a fork. So maybe to set some context, Kim, what kind of forks are we talking about?
So we are talking about, software repository forks or
Hmm.
project forks thereof, or any software projects. And usually we have a development model where, we call it like fork and pull. GitHub has really evangelized it. GitHub works in this model where you create your own fork, and then you do something in there, and then you propose your changes through a pull request. And
Yeah, so every branch is really a fork, kind of a little fork, though, right? And
that's right.
yeah, and hopefully with a branch, the fork would eventually merge back into the main path.
That's the hope.
So what's the so really the forks we're talking about are where there's development, two different paths of development, two different teams or people, two groups of people, kind of maintaining or developing a piece of software on two different paths. And the big question is, does that ever merge again? Is that accurate or?
Yeah, that's correct. So
Mhm.
considering open source software, whenever a team, a organization is consuming open source, how do they start, right? A small team, a very common practice is that they take a well-known release of that project. It may be a tarball, and then they start working with it, right? And they initially test it out, build it, uh, in the way upstream builds it for the platforms that are supported in there. So basically making no changes. They experiment with it, create experiences, learn, and to do that they don't need to make any changes. They use tested configurations, uh, and then you may come to a point, um, where you have learned all the designs and how it works. The inner workings are clear to you, and that's all good. So what's the next step, right? So the next step is, okay, we would like to use it in our products, or maybe we would like to make changes to it because now we know how to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the whole point of, we want to customize it for our product and make it um, something useful, a little bit
Hmm.
different maybe than,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, you might be a company designing hardware, right, which is based on probably, some well-known hardware design, but it's still custom. So you might want then uh, take this project and adopt to your hardware, right? And and that's where there is now a decision. There is like a fork in the road, as we said earlier on. So what do? You basically, there are different ways people have done it. They take the tarball, right, and then they create a repository out of it, right? Some people consume it through build systems like Yocto or Buildroot and things like that. And Yocto works in a patch model, which means you take a well-known upstream release, and then you create a patch and you store your changes as patches. And in some projects, like like if it is hosted on GitHub, you make a fork into your company's handle or your own handle, and that becomes your fork. Um, so there are different ways, but they all are forks in my mind. Now, once you have done, decided that you want to make a change, and that's when I think the further discussions around this emanates. How should we make that change?
Hmm. Yeah, so you have choices at this point, how you're going to go forward. And, it's often often people don't really want to think about choices, but the reality is, even if you don't think about your choices, you're still making a choice.
Hmm.
So the choice exists whether you think about it or not.
That's right.
So what are the choices we face here at this point in
Yeah, so
development?
I think there are predominantly two choices. One choice is you create a hard fork at that point, which means you take that snapshot and however you consumed it, you start from there and you start collecting your changes, and start tweaking and making, architectural changes, in some cases bigger changes, smaller changes, but you are adapting it to your own needs, for your own products, for your own platforms, whatever you're doing. um, you start doing that, and it's a very easy way at the beginning, because you can set up your own processes, you can set up your own tooling, and you have nobody to answer for, or you're not accountable to anyone at the very beginning. But um, you remember the moment you forked it, you were collaborating with the team, now you're in competition to them.
Mm-hmm.
Why I say that is because they are making changes, maybe not in the same areas as you, maybe in different areas, or maybe in same areas. And I have seen that, it has happened where you did something and the same thing was done by someone else in a very different way. And there might be architectural changes that upstream uh, is doing, which is changing, the architecture completely, and that throws you into, your own fork even harder. Um, so what happens over a period of time? The cost of maintenance goes up, and it goes significantly up, almost exponentially, because for some time you may recognize you're a fork, but then as time goes by, you would stop to recognize because you have added architectural changes. Upstream has added very different architecture changes, and you are at that point, you can't reconcile them.
Mm-hmm. So the longer this fork goes without some type of merging, the further the distance between them, and then it just becomes harder and harder to make the jump to merge from one to the other.
Hmm. Yeah. And um, so this is an approach. I mean, it has its own consequences, and if you're ready for that, it's a good approach from them, from that
Yeah,
aspect.
it's pretty common actually. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And however, if you take the second approach, which is more like a soft fork approach, um, what do? You basically engage with the project upstreams. Um, the moment you're making any change, you think about, like, this is a temporary change. I don't want to host it. I want to submit it upstream and get it merged. So any change you're making to that repository is accounted in the same way. You put processes around it. Say if you're maintaining patches, you document the patches with their upstream status. You describe the change and you document whether it has been submitted upstream or not. You basically create a process like that, so your teams are always on their feet on where does this patch stand in terms of upstreaming. And in many cases, you might have bigger changes that you want to propose, and what you do in that case is you basically engage with upstream. You open a design request or design change request, and then you send your proposal, get it a mind share to discuss it, get some ideas from other folks in the project. They may give you very valuable feedback as to to enhance your proposal. And you might sometimes get negative feedback as well, and those are important too, because they may uh, put constraints on your proposal, and how you're consuming the project. So it does take time, so essentially you'll realize that, okay, I'm interacting with upstream, my team is spending time, and it's not making progress because a lot of times upstream moves slowly, and uh, you may experience more vetting, which is good in a way, but you might find that waste of time, and all these feedbacks that you have to go through. It may make you conclude that it's a waste of time, and you may resort to option one.
Sure. Yeah, one thing we have to realize is that the mainline or upstream development, they're continuing to add value.
Hmm.
And it's a pretty rare case where at some point you don't look at that and say, "Oh, they've got some new stuff that I would really like to have in my product."
Hmm.
And at that point, if you've been on a hard fork for a long time, it gets really difficult to even merge upstream changes back into your code.
Yeah,
So that's one thing to realize. And as you've been talking, the other thing to realize is the development in open source is fairly high quality. So if you engage to implement some of the changes you need with the upstream community, chances are they will be implemented better, more maintainable, probably higher quality. If there's bugs and things, they'll be found. So your product will get better. You'll have better code, and so that's always a good thing.
that's true. And in long run, you'll see that payback of these changes is way higher, because you're aligned with the upstream. So you have this two-way street that is always open between your fork and upstream, and it obviously results in lower cost in doing a lot of development activities, which might be, you're backporting a fix for your product, which is on a previous release, or it has a time to service in the field, and and then you might be developing certain features that, as you said earlier, rightly, might require a few things that are new, and you can get that done quickly as well. And not in all cases, but in some cases, a lot of developers love interacting with upstream, and it results in a happy developer community at
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Usually it's a lot of fun. Not always. I mean, sometimes you run into personalities that are difficult to deal with, but usually it's an enjoyable experience. So
Hmm.
probably the most important thing in all this is you routinely merge with upstream, and you just keep your branch close to the upstream branch.
Hmm.
And one idea I heard in a recent meeting was a development group. They have a QEMU machine that they routinely fire up on the mainline branches to test their software.
Yeah.
So that way they don't have to go through all the work to like actually deploy it on their hardware, but they can test their layers and everything with upstream on a QEMU machine, and it's real easy.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think on the similar line, sometimes people have software, or which is using a lot of peripherals, and hardware components. Um, and it's always good to have, and most of the times they do have references based off of some SBCs, like BeagleBoard, or Raspberry Pi, or you name it, which is closer to their hardware design. Or maybe if you're just a pure software project, then doesn't matter, you just pick one and then run your operating system and your software on it regularly. And at times, it can be automated, um,
Hmm.
where you just kind of like bring upstream, you're based off of Ubuntu or whatever, install it in the VM, and check out your software, build on it, and then let the CI system report back saying, hey, in your compiler, you're not compiling properly.
Mhm.
And uh, so it becomes a routine activity, which can be done, at a very low overhead.
Sure. Any other trade-offs or pros or cons you can think of?
Yeah, so I think it's pay now or pay later.
Sure. Yeah, it's the classic trade-off.
It's a very classic trade-off, and I think it'll vary for everyone. But one thing is certain, that you end up saving time and development cost over a period of time if you stay engaged.
Hmm.
So you may not be able to justify right away, the upfront effort that you will spend, but overall, this will tend to be a very beneficial solution.
Sure. Yeah, and probably you could do it in phases. Like the most important thing is to keep merging and testing with upstream
Hmm.
to stay close. And then
Hmm.
at some point you want to start contributing back,
Hmm.
your general purpose work that isn't specific to your product, if you
Hmm.
can contribute. So it's kind of like two levels there. The first is important to set the groundwork and the foundation, but then
Hmm.
at some point, if you accumulate quite a few changes, it's real beneficial to get some of those pushed up too.
Yeah, yeah. Look, if you do a hard fork, you're swimming in a pond, and water
Hmm.
will stink after a while.
Sure.
If you work with upstream, you're swimming in a river. It's a
Yeah.
fresh water,
Hmm.
and you'll have a lot more fun.
Sure.
So I would say that watch out for these forks, visible or invisible, and
Hmm.
before you walk down too far. And some, as you said at the very beginning, a no decision is also a decision, and you might have decided for yourself without really really knowing it.
Sure. Well, I that sounds like some great ideas. So if our users have or listeners have any questions, please let us know.
Yep,
Ideas. We always like to hear from you.
always.
Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you.